Good evening. I'm Katrina Messenger, and welcome to September 2020's Dark Moon Message. We're going to have an interesting talk this evening. It's something that I'm not known for, but let's talk about the future. The future, 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 future. I've been thinking a lot about the overall state of the world. In the US, we are facing raging fires in the West and flooding rains in the South and the East. And the pandemic has exposed all the fault lines in our society and pushed too many folks worldwide into poverty, hunger, despair, and death. And here in the States, we are moving toward a fascist state at an amazing clip. We seem at times like we're arguing about the wrong things. We are arguing about economics as families go hungry. We are fighting over the cost of stimulus packages while essential workers work without appropriate safeguards or sufficient pay. So many people all over the world are living in dire circumstances, and we have folks fighting for bars to reopen. First world privilege mixes with class privilege, mixing in with white supremacy. What are we looking at to determine the state of our world? Do we watch the NASDAQ or the US unemployment rate or the COVID death toll? And how do we even measure the level of sanity, compassion, consensus, and concern? What should our focus be upon? What is an accurate measure that we can use to assess our ability to transform into a world where no one goes hungry, no one lacks medical care, where no one is forced to be homeless or without an education, or aren't able to reach for their dreams? Is it even possible? Why do we know the COVID death rate, for example, but not the recovery rate? Why do we know the unemployment rate, but not how many people are working at home? And aside from the smoke-filled Western fires, how much did our local areas benefit from the lack of heavy traffic? Where are the metrics concerning recovery, transformation, and adaptation? The reasons that these metrics are not tracked, or if tracked, are not widely shared, are complex. Part of the problem is how we consume news. If it bleeds, it leads always prioritizes destruction, felony crime, and political shenanigans. We seem to not be interested in complex information that requires us to learn, concentrate, or remember. Years ago, I read an entire issue of a Canadian newspaper and was pleasantly surprised by the depth of the information that was shared. The stories were varied and informative, and the various coverages were balanced and helpful. And it wasn't just good news, but very little was about destruction, felony crime, and political corruption. What kind of world would we be living within if our news was like this all the time? How would we adjust our expectations to accept and pay attention to the news of this nature? A lot would have to change. Our government, major industries, and institutions would need to be transformed, yes, but we would also have to change because the reality is that we are part of the problem. Local news often covers the unsung heroes collecting food, clothing, and PPE. And yes, there are people and institutions all over doing the hard work of keeping families above water. And yet, there is still so much going on in the world unnoticed and underreported. Well, yes, we need everyone to vote blue this November. We need folks to hit the front lines to defend Black lives. We need to take a stand against the neo-Nazis and their ilk. And yes, we definitely need to keep the heat on 45 and his supporters everywhere. But we can also highlight the transformational, informative, and future-focused work that is happening everywhere around us. To create a world where we consumed a more balanced version of the news, we need to reach out and also pay attention to what's happening in the world beyond our corrupt government officials, beyond major crime, and beyond the machinations of politicians. How do we grow enough food in accessible areas so everyone can be fed? What dietary changes would help us increase soil reclamation and preserve biodiversity? How do we support innovation while conserving and protecting fragile ecosystems? What levels of density would make infrastructure more cost effective and increase life expectancies? How to preserve forested areas and to decrease desertification. These are, there are experiments, studies, and models out there answering these questions like these every day. Why don't we know about them? Why aren't they in the news? And the news we do consume only simplifies major issues and does almost nothing to clarify them. For example, we share the COVID death rate and not the recovery rate because too many people are convinced that if recovery rates are high, which they are, they will not take the pandemic seriously. This is a pretty big indicator of how little science and math understanding there is in this country. Because even if, say, for example, the death rate was at 1%, okay, meaning a 99% recovery rate, that would mean the deaths of over 3 million people if, for instance, we all caught the disease as some recommend. And that alarming level of death is nothing to take lightly. That's why we don't hear the recovery rate, because there are people who don't understand that 1% of the US population is still a heck of a lot of people. And as far as how many people are working from home due to COVID, the numbers jump significantly from less than 10% of office staff working 5 days a week from home to 77% in a survey from the Global Workplace Analytics. And the impacts on the environment have been incredible. But what is more uplifting news is that because of the cost savings, the decrease in air pollution, and the concrete experience of employers, it's highly likely that 25 to 30% of employees will likely continue to work remotely after the pandemic crests. This will make commuting to work become less likely over time. All that space taken up by empty offices could be converted to affordable living spaces, forever changing the work habits of millions of people. We could see a change in lifestyle in a single generation instead of waiting decades. Understanding these trends could influence not only policy changes, but also our own personal decision making. And here's the big question: did you even realize the repercussions of this change? How will we become more aware of these possibilities like these when even the local news broadcast doesn't cover it with enough depth? And this is the subject of the message tonight. What we pay attention to gets our energy. And right now, most of us are putting all of our energy into the election, the coming civil war, and the well being of our families and communities. And all that is right and proper. But we also have to put some energy towards the future we want to bring about. And that means we should also track what's happening in the world that we want to emulate and or bring home to our little portion of the biosphere. We need to build as we dismantle, or it will be all for naught. There are answers to all of the questions I asked earlier about food security, dietary changes, innovation, housing density, and desertification. There are everyday folks out in the world purifying ocean water, cleaning rivers and streams, reclaiming fertile soil, and growing food in new ways and places, etc. How do we find out about them and learn enough to understand their significance and impact? What best practices out there that would resolve issues in our own neighborhoods today? Hell, what are you doing that is innovative and solves real problems? Write it up. Tell someone in the news. Let's make room for continuous learning, continuous discovery, and new world building. Let's build the future starting with today. And that's my rant for tonight. What do you have to say? I'm moving over to read the comments. Oh, I see Kit is here and listening. Excellent. Would love to hear your thoughts. There's a delay between me saying something and the comments actually reflecting what folks are thinking. Everybody's saying happy new moon, happy new and dark moon to you too. I've been told that I floored everyone. These are intelligent folks. I would love to know if folks had figured out the meaning of so many people um, um, working from home nowadays. It is the kids continue to be along with parents working from home. That creates some stresses that will need answers that I don't have. I'm saying this based on friends' comments online. Yeah, it will create some stresses. One of the things that's interesting that in some places the way they're dealing with the lack of internet access for all families is actually having some students actually come to the school and sit in classrooms separate from the teachers and access the classroom via the Wi-Fi of the school, which is kind of interesting. I wonder what we can learn from that about ways to handle the children, because part of it we need to understand is that this means that we need to accept that part of the work of teachers is childcare, and we've never given them credit for that. Folks trying to do the work on their own have found it to be just about incredible. It is like coming to that realization that we're basically asking these teachers to do far more than just education. Yeah, I believe that's Angela said Mexico just put their curricula on broadcast TV, so internet is not an issue. That is brilliant. That is very brilliant. John says I can see calls for new community-based sharing, such as watching kids and helping them with learning at a smaller scale than large schools. That's interesting too. There are other ways to handle these type of needs. And how do we educate our children? And how do we handle um, the cost and burdens of commuting? Those are good questions. And what can we do about it? Obviously, that's part of the reason why it will only be 25 to 30% are going to basically stay with remote work. Um, a lot of folks would rather not have to do that if it means they have to stay home with the kids. On the other hand, 80% said all things being equal, right? They would have preferred to commute telecommute all along. That remote working was something they always wanted. It was the employers, the managers, and the supervisors who were against it. But now, you can ask them, how do you think now? And many of them have changed their mind because all you had to do was look at the output of the work, not stand over people's shoulders to see if they actually were doing what was asked of them. So this will be an education for a great deal of people's in positions of authority. I think Warren is also sponsoring a bill to establish federal child care system, something that was dashed back in the 70s. When people work from home in comfortable clothes, large stores going out of business for lack of shoppers, there are entire industries affected. Yes, And it's not just the thing about clothes, it's also restaurants and office supplies. There are a lot of things that are concentrated in areas where people were going to work that need to be distributed so that folks or available, for delivery where folks are actually doing their work. One of the things that they looked at in that survey was, did workers have what they needed? And they found that for most of them, they were able to get the supplies they needed um, and readily. Um, and whether or not they were still consuming takeout and delivery is another question altogether. I haven't seen a survey, or I haven't looked for a survey on the restaurant industry and how they would have to change to handle more people at home. But the massive relocation of a good portion of the population twice a day so they could commute to work and then commute home, maybe, something that's going out of style. But we need to find out then, what else do people who work at home need from these industries? And yeah, I know I wear pajamas all day. I wouldn't be surprised that folks would have to change what they're offering to people as far as clothing. So were people aware of some of the things about the that there was, we all hear about what happening in Detroit with urban farming, but there is way more happening all over the country with different ways to grow food. And I had placed up on Facebook one of the studies that came up with an ideal way for people to change their dietary habits that would make it more easily food available to everyone, and would help farmers um, grow the food, help grow healthy food in a way that did not remove all the nutrients from their soil. So these are things that we could learn from right now and we could be implementing. Anyone else? Yeah, I think large concentrations of people and resources in specialized areas will become um, less cost efficient over time. And so there's going to be more of a opportunity for decentralization across the board. Yeah, better ways to get food into food deserts. Yeah, that's what makes the Detroit process so interesting, is that the food is grown and is available to everyone who lives there. That is just amazing. Yeah, we need innovators out there figuring out what kind of businesses are to scale in decentralized systems. And with some of the restaurants, what they're doing is that many of the chefs all share a large kitchen, and then create the food that that they specialize in and sell it for delivery. So they don't all each of them don't have to have a restaurant. I think that is brilliant as well. People people are leaving expensive cities in droves, that's actually a problem because when they leave the city, they go out to areas that require new infrastructure to be built, as opposed to investing in repair and maintenance of the infrastructure that is already built in most cities and towns. So they're moving out of the cities is actually a problem, which is why we need to have a better ability to create affordable housing in the cities, because that's where you're going to get the economies of scale. In times of crisis, both natural disasters and medical crises like we're facing now, having people so spread out may not as be as helpful for their own safety and survival. It depends, I guess. But yeah, we need to rethink that. And then we're also moving into places that would be less, we better served by allowing it to stay wild and untouched, or to recover from the work we, for the destruction that's already happened. That was one of the touching things I saw, and one of the yeah, more smart growth policies and zoning rather than sprawl. You're absolutely right, Lauren. One of the things I saw that was very touching were people standing around looking at the places where their homes had been in California and in Oregon and Washington, and just shaking their heads, and the whole and they're saying things like, why did we ever move into the forest? And I'm not quite sure that's the right question, but the question is also, why did we think it would be okay to build so many homes in areas with that combustible um, wild fauna and trees? That's just amazing. So then it's like, how do we get real estate developers to create affordable housing as opposed to luxury housing that most people can't afford? Well, that's one of those tax things. The governmental policies of what they support. Um, they tend to go for luxury housing when that's where they think they're going to get their money. But the reality is that those things don't necessarily sell. There's only so much money that you can get for people who are selling luxury housing. There's a limit. At some point, you're going to have to lower the price or leave a lot of the units empty. I know in DC, if they can't, a lot of developers used to just leave the roof unfinished so they don't have to pay property taxes. And so what happens is that you get these huge complexes with these high rents, and they're not paying anything in property tax. So there needs to be some governmental policies that actually support not only affordable housing, but also take away the loopholes for developers when they do things that are really shady. And let's see, a new generation is growing up without social skills. I'm not sure what that is connected to. All the things we don't really need, all these roads, huge stores, money chasing development, and we could make cities so much more affordable, green, and pleasant. You're absolutely right. The early lessons of what Portland did back in, I can't remember if it was the 70s or 80s, where they stopped the sprawl and instead invested in Portland, and the city grew and became a wonderful place to live and a great place to visit. And so they did this by specifically their development policies. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Harper. You're absolutely right. And there's so many like studies and examples of all of these things, and the lessons from them are available. And I when I look at the news, how many of how much of the devastation from the floods do we need to look at? How many minutes of that do we need to look at in order to get that there has been a terrible flood? They will go in and show this town and this town and this town and show an equivalent, video of it because it's available. And they want to be the first to say, we showed this town and this town. And at the same time, right, they'll sit there and talk with some talking head about something that 45 said, which was nonsense. Why are they repeating it over and over and over again, which they've already figured out? That's how he gets his message out, is the constant repetition. And they, instead of filling the time with these things, they could be filling the time with, and here's an example of this. It's news, right? It's news you could use. So yeah, there's that. I got a fly on my screen. Anyway, what I'm saying is that for that to change, we have to change. And part of that is we being willing to look for, share, and talk about, and write letters about, these are things we need to know about. And if you're doing something that's fantastic, by all means, let people know. Get the news people in on it, so we can learn from each other. Because we can't just talk about dismantling all these systems with nothing to take their place. We have to think about how and what way are we going to build this future that we want. But that's what I wanted to get across. And you guys had some really good ideas and really good conversation. Thank you. I think that's about it for tonight. Thank you for joining in for my September 17th, 2020 Dark Moon message. Look forward to more from Connect DC, including our Maybon ritual, which is coming up this Sunday, I believe. Same bat channel, same bat station. And then followed by, I believe, another full moon and hopefully another dark moon. But also let folks know that we are now accepting applications into the Reflections Celestial Program. Check out reflectionsdc.org. Thank you. I'm Katrina Messenger. Have a great weekend.